Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 5th of May 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We're delighted to say we'll be joined by David Scott of Northern Exposure, of course, be reporting from north of the border. I believe he may have a little bit of a canine friend with him today, judging by the noise in the background. Well, we have survived the elections. The question is, will UK survive the elections and the road that we can see mapped out in front of us? But of course, before we go to them, we should return to the important issue of the day, which was the Duke of Edinburgh is going to step back from his royal duties. We were not that complimentary, but it appears that the Times feels that people ought to be sticking up for the aged gentleman, a sage and moderniser, so much greater than his grumpy image. Well, we're not impressed because we say, what has this man ever done to help and support the ordinary people of Britain? But I'm glad they managed to scrape up the funds for a little threadbare blanket there, Mike. I'm encouraged by that because it must be difficult when you're retired at that age.
Absolutely.
On their pension.
Yes, absolutely. David, a sage and a moderniser, those two words must have been the first two that came to mind.
There are very few things to say about that. Do they mean the well-known brand of accountancy software, or do they mean sage as in, I'm just looking at the definition here, a thinker, savant, learned man, man of letters, philosopher, scholar, Solomon. Not exactly how I would have put it.
No.
We'll move on.
Okay. We'll move on to the local elections. I hope everybody voted. I say that with some slight sarcasm. But anyway, well, the news, of course, of the local elections is the absolute obliteration of UKIP. I think it's no surprise to us, Brian.
No surprise at all. And I'm very happy to say I'll make it a personal comment so there's no misunderstanding that I have been warning the body of the UKIP church for years that Nigel Farage would lead the party into a cul-de-sac. He was waving the banner, but of course he came out with the magic words, Brexit, it's all over, we've done our job. That was the biggest lie of the century, and now they're paying the price.
So let's look at the results that are known so far. Now, apparently there weren't too many councils running counts overnight because they would have had to pay people time and a half or double time to do that. And in this age of austerity, they were therefore leaving most of the counts to office hours today. But an hour or two ago, this is how it stood just before we came on air. The proportions aren't so different, but we've got a runaway success for Theresa May.
Yeah. And this is extremely dangerous. We're going to stay with this theme because we can see exactly where Theresa May is trying to go, which is for an increased majority. And once she's back in government with that increased majority, we are going to see a police state emerge, the likes of which has never been seen before. The evidence is all there. We're going to show you some of that evidence today.
Well, I thought we'd have a look at this tweet from Vicky Young from the BBC saying, strange tactic from UKIP leader saying Tory advance price worth paying for Brexit. Well, that perhaps gives us a clue to his mindset if he believes that the success of the Tory party here is a price worth paying for Brexit. First of all, it means he doesn't recognise what the Tories mean by Brexit. And second of all, it's a total betrayal?
It's a betrayal of all the hard-working UKIP people, and of course it was largely the work of the UKIP people on the ground that started to get the message out on the streets, which gives rise to 17 million people voting to leave the European Union. And then we have somebody here saying, well, you know, you might as well go and vote for Theresa May now.
But it was Douglas Carswell's answer. It's over. It's over. What was he referring to? He was referring to UKIP, I believe. Other tweets that Douglas Carswell were put out, several of them said job done. And of course, in my opinion, what that means is that his job was done in destroying the party, which he absolutely successfully did by continuing to create the sort of fractious tension within the leadership, which he and Nigel Farage managed to hit it off extremely well in that regard.
They did, and what we can talk about firsthand because of reports that UK Column has had from UKIP people across the country is virtually no support from the hierarchy of the party during the election process. People left to do what they could on the ground with their own knowledge. And this, of course, has been the theme with UKIP ever since Nigel Farage has been leading the party. And at the moment, UKIP trying very hard to sell itself on broader policies, quite rightly, and some very good ones. But of course, again, Nigel Farage not talking about the key issues as to what has actually been going on in UK. And one very telling area that Nigel Farage simply will not talk about is the loss of UK's military into the EU unified military structure, which is continuing on a daily basis.
So, David, what are your thoughts on this? Because what Farage has done here quite successfully is to reunite the Conservative, with a small c, the Conservative portion of the vote.
Well, there's a big question as to whether the Conservative Party actually represents the Conservative portion of the vote, because there's not a lot of genuine Conservative attitudes being shown in what they're putting forward as a policy. Either side of Hadrian's Wall, they seem to be positioning themselves as some sort of centre-left party, and that leaves the right wing and Conservative viewpoints in this country unrepresented, and that's why UKIP arose, and now UKIP has been thrown away, and it failed to organise itself into a longer lasting political force. So once again, we have a choice between the centre left and the marginally further left, and all of it is big government, all of it is big state. And all of it seems to be operating to agendas that are made not in the streets and byways of Britain.
Absolutely. Well, we had one local election result which ended up in a tie. And as a result, you may be able to see it in the image there. As a result, the decision was made by drawing straws, David. And thanks to Alex for sending me this. Now, just to clarify what the rules are in this country, where there is a tie between two or more candidates receiving the same number of votes, the acting returning officer will decide the result by lot. It's a matter for the acting returning officer to determine the method used. So I thought that drawing straws was a bit of a wimpy sort of response to this. I thought perhaps pistols at dawn or swords or something might be a better option.
No, this is vital information, because the reason that gambling is viewed as being unchristian is not because it's stupid and you lose your money to the bookie. It's because that drawing lots was traditionally how you decided what God wanted. So who won that one again? Lib Dem?
Lib Dems, yeah.
But not the Tories. Oh, I just throw that in there.
Okay. Well, let's have a look at what's going on north of the border then. This is Telegraph here. Nicola Sturgeon urged to break silence over SNP cash for votes allegations, and also the Scotsman saying Nick Sturgeon facing claims SNP ignored election cash rules. Is she really a closet Conservative? Because it seems that it's the Conservatives that have been sort of leading the way in this area.
Oh, she's just learned well. Well, what we've got here is the position, the sort of emotions that you feel about the Conservative south of the border, many of us feel about the nationalists north of the border. We had a situation where there's a problem with the SNP policy. There's many problems with it. One is the pro-EU, so the pro-common fisheries policy, which is, of course, a disaster for the coastal edges of Scotland, particularly the northeast fishing communities, which have been devastated by this. So it doesn't go down very well. So when this came to the fore and some of the candidates were saying, we don't want to be in the common fisheries policy, which really means you have to be not in the EU because there are no choices in the EU because of the nature of the beast. that was a bit of an embarrassment. And then within days, there was an extra £1 million found for the marine industry. And then when the campaign in Glasgow got quite close, there was a lot of money suddenly went to Glasgow, and it just seemed to be very fortuitous and very close to the election. So there are going to be some questions to answer after all of the dust has settled. Can you believe that the SNP would use their political position to further their own political ends without regard to lawful conduct or the best interest of the country?
No, I would find that very difficult to believe. David?
Well, it's something we're going to have to consider, I'm afraid, Mike, painful though that will be.
David, if I may, ambushing you slightly on this one, but can you tell us anything about Nicola Sturgeon's failure to pay council tax? We just touched on it yesterday. It has been reported in the press north of the border. Our interest was she's decided she doesn't want to pay for some reason. I think the sum was about £2,500, Scottish pounds, of course. But south of the border, we've got members of the public being held in custody if they get by the police if they get in dispute over council tax. Do you know anything about this alleged crime by the First Lady?
I'm ashamed to admit I don't. I'm very sorry. You'll need to tell me all about it.
Okay.
Okay, we'll leave you to research that, but it is a particularly interesting story.
Okay.
Just while we're on Scottish politics, I would just happen to say the three words I never thought I'd hear: Conservatives win Shettleston.
So you need to tell us about Shettleston.
Shettleston's in the east end of Glasgow. It's been a Labour seat since politics was invented, and it's never voted Conservative, I think, in its entire history. And it's also the seat of someone we've covered in the past, John Mason, MSP, for the Nationalists. So whether it's to do with him, whether it's to do with the collapse of the Labour Party in Scotland, which is profound, it voted Conservative, and really it's I never thought I'd see the day.
So do you think that swing is as a result of just disenchantment with Labour generally? Is it disenchantment with Jeremy Corbyn? Or is it actually a rerunning of the referendum on European Union?
The collapse of the Labour Party has been a slow motion train wreck for about 20 years. They went from a position of arrogant hegemony to where they are now, in part because the SNP stole their clothes. The SNP made sure they couldn't be flanked on the left. The SNP, despite the nationalist flag-waving, paint-facing pretensions, are not a nationalist party. They're an international socialist party. And they have managed to package socialism with a Scottish face and with a tartan tinge that has actually outflanked the Labour Party in Scotland. So as the Labour Party has become weaker generally, and the likelihood of being empowered, etc., has diminished, any lingering ability to garner votes from that reason has gone, and they have collapsed. It's been very spectacular. They're sitting a distant third now in Scotland.
Okay. Well, it seems that identity is a general problem there.
Identity is this was a little exchange I had this morning on Twitter, and the starting point was an article which said EU nationals find their voice and campaign for Scottish independence. That's a strange title at the best of times. Why would EU nationals be campaigning for Scottish independence? So I did reply that the Scots would just have to put up with whatever came out of that, because we're in a position where the majority of Scots could vote to stay within the EU and within the UK, and we might be outvoted by EU nationals. Free movement and all that. So I got a response, and the response ended up going down a very strange route, because I pointed out what a nation was and the richness and complexity of it, and the response was, no, it's just about where you are, as long as you're inside the borders and you're a member of that nation. So the people who have arrived in the last years, they're every bit as Scots as anybody else. Nothing else to see here, even though they're still EU nationals. And when I questioned that, I was told that identity is a fluid concept. Identity is a fluid concept. We, notice they always use the plural because this is groupthink. This is a collective you're talking to, not an individual. We have the right to identify as whatever we want, and you won't shut us up. So this is gender identity politics transferred to national identity in Scotland. It's very, very bizarre.
I'll just add there, David, that a little bit later I've got some information around what's happening in Westminster. All the political parties are involved. But again, we see this fluid nature of what the nation state is coming in very clearly. And the most cynical thing is, of course, that people who are newcomers to this country are being used in such a cold, callous way to drive this political agenda. Go ahead.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon is calling for more migrants from the EU. I've been told on Twitter that I should go off to England and make room for some civic-minded people from Europe to take my place. There is an attack on Scottishness. There's an attack on Scottish people and Scottish identity, and that's not wanted. What's wanted is people who will vote the right way, people who will comply with the politically correct agenda, and people who will not say or think awkward things. It illustrates the fact that Scottish nationalism is not really nationalism at all. It's something else entirely.
Well, perhaps we could gently mention the term cult, which we are seeing being appropriate for all the major parties, but we'll deal with that another time.
Well, let's have a look at this then. So this is the Law Society, and they have produced a document for the general election 2017 called Our Vision for Law and Justice. And they say, following the announcement of a general election on the 8th of June 2017, this document outlines what we believe, Law Society, believe the next government's priorities should be to maintain the integrity of our jurisdiction, remove barriers to justice, and uphold the rule of law. We've identified a series of calls to the incoming government to help ensure legal certainty is maintained in light of Brexit. Every individual has effective access to justice, that human rights are safeguarded, including in business, and modern slavery is combated. So they say that Brexit will be the largest ever change to the UK's legal framework. Over the years of membership, our legal system has become intertwined with that of the EU. Unravelling this is a complex task, potentially resulting in significant changes to the rights and obligations of individuals and businesses. So there's perhaps an early clue as to what this is about, because they're talking about rights and obligations, because you don't get rights if you're dealing in the world of human rights unless you meet your obligations. You only have the right to life if you meet your obligations to pay your taxes and all these other things. Throughout the negotiation, they say the withdrawal period, it is crucial that the UK government does all it can to maintain legal certainty as well as promote the rule of law and independence of the profession, and which play a key role in administration of the justice system. And they talk about the civil and criminal justice. They talk about the impact of court fee increases. They talk about human rights, that the UK is a global leader in promoting human rights. But they want to see the retention of the Human Rights Act or replaced by a British Bill of Rights. David, guess how many times, bearing in mind this is from the Law Society and we're talking about law, guess how many times the word common appears in this document?
Well, I wouldn't have thought very often, logically.
Well, a total of 0 times. 0 times. So the Law Society here, which is supposed to be the British Law Society, is in fact promoting European law, European legal systems. They want to see European jurisprudence brought into this country, or corpus juris brought into this country, a new Bill of Rights, and no mention of the Constitution, no mention of separation of powers, no mention of anything. They want to make sure that trade deals are done in the European sense, that civil and criminal justice is done in the European sense, and they want to see an end to British justice, historically speaking, and common law. So they don't expressly say that, but the point is, by omission, they do.
It'd be interesting to see how often the word rights appears. We have rights for everything. that last tweet that was on there, this person who's probably not long in from Europe has a right to a Scottish identity. A right. A right is something you can defend with violence. You have a right to your life. Someone tries to take it. You can take them out. You can use violence to defend a right. That's how high that is being placed. But we're now being told we have a right to a Scottish identity if you want one, and then to throw off that Scottish identity if you no longer want it. You have a right to healthcare. You have a right to happiness. You have a right to all sorts of things. These are rights. Rights are something that you can use violence to acquire, that you can coerce people to provide. It's very worrying that we've forgotten what rights mean, and there's a profusion of these when people are not actually talking about desires. The language has been changed. The words have changed meaning.
Yeah, so you degrade the value of a right, and of course, and then a right, which is a desire, is something that you only get if you meet your obligations. You are coerced into doing something which means that you get your rights. That's the modern form of government.
Yes.
Yeah. A bit of you have to describe this one yourself.
The leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Ruth Davidson, came up with, it was a good line, and I think in a grim world we've got to acknowledge a good line. So he was describing the Scottish nationalists and how they're telling half the people of Scotland that the forthcoming general election has nothing to do with Scottish independence, and they're telling the other half that it's vital and the key issue is Scottish independence. So the Conservative leader was mocking this duality and duplicity, and saying that the claim that the independence referendum was nothing to do with the general election was hard to substantiate when you'd seen Nicola sitting on a motorbike festooned with yes stickers, and she paused and she said, like a gnat out of hell. So I want you to carry that phrase and that little image the rest of the day. You're welcome.
Okay, this is perhaps a little more serious then. So because we've seen a couple of articles along this line over the last few days. This is from The Wire saying EU to formally announce that a united Ireland would be an automatic full member of the European Union. What is this? If they actually try to push this forward, what is this likely to do to Ireland?
Well, it's potentially destabilizing to Ireland, but it's the timing of it all that strikes me. I mean, clearly, if you have a state from outside the EU with historical links to one inside the EU and they're reunited, are they inside or outside of the European Union? Well, we've always known the answer to that because Germany went through exactly that process, and there was no question that the united Germany pays all the money. Was going to be within the EU. So it's not really news. Why raise it now? Well, it's raised to put more pressure on Britain. It's raised to put, I see this part of an attack on the integrity of the United Kingdom. What we're seeing here is European power, having been thwarted by the Brexit vote, is now counter-attacking by trying to dismantle the United Kingdom. So that's happening in Ireland, where they're trying to put out feelers to see if they can get a united Ireland to split Northern Ireland off from Britain. It's happening in Scotland, partly by the never-ending encouragement of nationalist tendencies from Europe, from the EU, from the European Parliament, and partly by the changing the demography of Scotland with European immigration into Scotland to change the voting intentions. And potentially the outcome.
If I absolutely accept what you're saying, David, but if what you're saying is correct, then basically the EU clearly isn't paying attention, because if they were, they would recognise that all they have to do is sit and wait, because the British government is doing a fantastic job of destroying the UK from the inside. They don't need any external assistance.
Well, they don't realise that. I mean, the response from the EU this last week to belittle, berate, and threaten the United Kingdom shows a complete lack of understanding of the nature of Britain and the nature of the British people. The one thing that they don't like, be the English, Scots, Welsh, or Irish, is to be pushed around by a foreign power.
Okay, there's a lot to discuss around that area. We're just watching the clock a little bit. Let me bring this one in. Thank you very much to the viewer that emailed this in this morning. So we've got parliament.uk. Background, this is all about Britain's theatre industry, and it's crowing that theatre gives a turnover of 15.1 billion, of which 7.7 billion goes to the UK economy. So I'm interested in theatre because we hear this being used on the world stage, don't we? Actors in the theatre of events, whether it's Syria or elsewhere. But this caught my eye, so we just bring this in on, bring it in on screen. Here we are. The NHS looks after us physically, but theatre looks after us spiritually. This is a quote from the British Council. I thought you'd be interested in that bit, David, but I'll give you the other bit here because it says UK theatre is critically acclaimed across the world and showcases the country's creative talent overseas, working as an important element of the UK's soft power. Now we're really into the heart of what government is in this country. It's nothing to do with elections and voting. This is into the deep and very dark state, and we're now getting this word soft power coming in with the basic topic theatre. Any thoughts? Theatre is what looks after us in a spiritual sense, really.
It's gobsmacking, isn't it? I mean, the arrogance. The reason that the film with puppets called Team America, where there was a plot to destroy the world, and this was going to be thwarted by acting, and it also features the Film Actors Guild, which is a send up of the Screen Actors Guild in America. It's now starting to look more and more like a documentary.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the Middle East, David, and we'll begin with Boris in Libya. The hypocrisy here, spectacular. This man needs to be removed from his seat at the forthcoming general election. And I hope that anybody that's in his constituency will help achieve that. But what they're saying is he was visiting Tripoli yesterday, and he was there to meet the Prime Minister and of the interim government. They want to create a unified and stable government, they say, after they demolished the place with their bombs. So he met the Libyan Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister to discuss the challenges faced by Libya's government of national accord and how the UK can support Libyan efforts to re-establish security, stability and prosperity for the Libyan people. Okay, I think I better not say any more about that because it could get ugly very quickly. Let's see what he had to say. He said Libya's political and social groups need to seize the momentum offered by the welcoming meeting between the Prime Minister and Marshal Haftar earlier this week to set out a path towards Libyan reconciliation and unity. Security, stability and prosperity can only be achieved when the country's leaders choose to get together and work out a plan for the common benefit of Libyan people. Establishing effective governance is also the key to defeating terrorism in Libya and countering illegal migration.
Which is why they've got common purpose paid by the EU to help reform the Libyan government and civil service, or equivalent of.
Yes. I wasn't clear how Boris Johnson would recognise effective governance.
Well, he's a buffoon, Mike, but I think intellectually he's an extremely dangerous man because he gets away with his policy behind the buffoonery.
Right.
So he'll be up to no good there. Mind you, when Blair went there, people died. So presumably Boris has been there. We can expect more deaths in Libya.
He also went to Tunisia, so we'll see what happens there in the not too distant future. But let's have a look at this one. This is Daily Mirror saying, this is from yesterday, I think, saying Theresa May plots snap vote on bombing Syria, but is she turning into Trump's poodle? And of course, this is a bit of propaganda here, again reinforcing the idea that it's the United States which is driving the potential action in Syria in the coming weeks, when in fact it's Britain. If we look at the attack on Trump with regard to the alleged Russian intervention in US politics, that's all come out of ex-MI6 people. And it's Michael Fallon and Boris Johnson that have been putting pressure on for bombing Syria. So this is not about doing what Trump might wish us to do.
We've just got to bring in here, Mike. They're talking about bombing Syria. We're talking about bombing, according to reports. We're talking about bombing Assad's forces, which is effectively bombing the Russians. So this is going to get very interesting very quickly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they're not talking about bombing ISIS.
Of course not.
We're going to come on to a little bit of that in a second. But let's look at this one, David, because you sent this to me. I've seen this elsewhere. Another example of what Vanessa Bailey has been pointing out for quite a long time now, that everywhere you look, when you see the white helmets or something related to the white helmets, you find terrorists, and this is just another example of it.
Terrorists everywhere, and terrorists who are prepared to do anything. I did watch and will probably never forget the video of the terrorist beheading the young Palestinian boy from that neck of the woods, and it was ghastly. And you're talking about people who will do absolutely anything. They're perfectly prepared to kill some children to bring America in on their side in a war and start bombing the Syrian army. They would do it in a heartbeat. So the mainstream media's obsession with believing every bit of propaganda that comes out of Syria, dismissing every statement from the Syrian government as obvious lies, and believing the terrorists is bizarre. And it's going to, if the people don't make their voices heard, make it clear we're not buying this rubbish anymore, they're going to persuade and cajole and bully us into another futile, destructive war where more British and American blood will be spent, and the potential of triggering something truly horrendous is getting ever closer. Boris may be a buffoon, he may be a clever buffoon, but I don't think anyone is suggesting he has the sort of geopolitical ability to redesign the world. And that is what they're trying to pretend they can do.
Absolutely. Well, the true nature of ISIS, then we get another hint from Hamid Karzai, the former Afghan president. And he was talking about the dropping of the Moab bomb in Afghanistan a couple of weeks ago. This is the massive ordnance air blast bomb, which was experimented with by the United States, apparently to blow up ISIS in their caves, because ISIS seems to have taken over the caves that were occupied by bin Laden, as if by magic. And he was quite disparaging about this whole situation. He said that ISIL had already emptied most of their families out of the area, that the removal of ISIL from the area was coordinated with the bombing. He then said the group is just a US tool. They cannot be any other tool. First, ISIL comes to drive people away. That's the people out of the caves, the terrorists out of the caves. And then the US comes and drops their big bomb. Come on, is what he's saying. You know, that he has clearly fallen out with the Western powers in recent months, but nonetheless, I think he's hitting the nail on the head there.
And a brave man to say so,
Yeah.
I would suggest.
David?
Very brave to say so, because it's a dangerous country and things can happen. And you know, he's speaking out against some very powerful vested interests. And this is what we're seeing, and we've seen it back to the 50s, is this link between CIA, Western power, MI6, Britain, and hugely involved, and the drugs trade and terrorism and the interaction between the two.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Israel then, and this is Jerusalem Post. Former minister who said that if Trump deal fails, we need to block one-state scenario.
A really, really telling little statement. He said, let's see, let me get the right quote here. The continuing trends in Judea and Samaria, Gaza and Israel, if we don't do anything, we could give the Palestinians a chance to beat us One day they come and say, we don't want a state. We want to vote. We can't get to this date. Now, this is a realization, something we've been talking about in the column for a while. The Palestinians shouldn't be using violence. The Palestinians don't have the weaponry, the throw weight to make that worthwhile. They've got one bomb. It's a demographic bomb. Within the original boundaries of Palestine, there are roughly equal numbers of Palestinian Arabs and Jews. If the state was democratic and everyone had a vote, then the state could not be Jewish. It would need to be something much more plural. And that is the big threat that the Jewish right wing now see. They see one state as the one state could not be both Jewish and democratic. It would have to pick.
David, I think I'm correct in saying that it's specifically, the policy is specifically put forward as a Zionist policy in that article. So if I'm correct, of course, this helps us differentiate between what the people of Israel might want and what the Zionist political regime wants to achieve.
I think what you're alluding to there is the diversity of opinion in Israel. And that's absolutely correct. There was an article within the last week that was discussing the possibility of civil war in Israel, because the split between those who want to have a Jewish state along the shores of the Mediterranean and those who want to have an expansionist, an exclusive Jewish state displacing Arab populations is now so fundamental that some people within Israel are seeing civil war as the only potential future there. Now, whether it's quite that bad, I'm not so sure, but that's what was reported in Haaretz, the Israeli paper. So you're seeing a huge split between sides of opinion within the Jewish world as to how to reach any sort of resolution. It's a horrendous problem, something that hopefully we can talk about in more detail in maybe another venue. A truly horrendous problem to find any peaceful way forward.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to children's issues and back north of the border. On Wednesday, you were at the Fresh Start Foundation conference, David.
Yes, we had our launch conference on Wednesday. It was tremendously warm, emotional, very spirited meeting. A lot of great speakers. The speakers were fantastic. You see two of them there. You see Shirley Cooper and our own Robert Green. And it was a tremendous day, and it was an excellent start. And we are now sitting down and starting to look at some of the detail of how we can provide what the victims and survivors of child sexual abuse in Scotland need, which is truth and justice.
And it actually made it into the mainstream press as the Daily Record covering.
Yes, the Daily Record had a journalist there who gave a very good report on what we were talking about, a very accurate report, and we also were covered by Scottish Television. So yeah, the word was getting out.
Okay, fantastic. And just remind everybody of what the website address is for that.
That's freshstart.co.uk. And you get updates there. All the videos from the conference will be up during the course of next week. So those who couldn't make it along to the event live can catch all of the speakers. It's a bit of an emotional roller coaster in place, but well worth it. Excellent speakers providing a lot of vital information. I certainly learned a lot during the day.
And sorry, just very briefly, David, what's the latest on Holly Greig and the official inquiry in Scotland?
The latest is we haven't decided yet. We're 2.5 years into the official inquiry in Scotland, and we have not yet decided whether Holly Greig is included. Although I would point out that if you read narrowly the terms of reference, her case will not be included, but we haven't quite got round to saying that yet.
Ah, right, okay.
David, I noticed the letter that came back from the Scottish inquiry to that effect was not signed. This is becoming increasingly common. You get a document from a body of people, it's not signed, therefore it has completely no value. But just one very quick point on the conference. I believe there was only one charity present, and that other Scottish child protection charities did not attend because they were scared that the Scottish Government might disapprove and pull their funding. Is there any truth to that allegation?
I suspect there is. I suspect there's a lot of truth to that. There was one charity there, and the view that we formed discussing this matter was that the reason the other charities were not attending is that they're largely an extension of government these days. They receive major government funding, they deliver government projects and programs, so they are essentially co-opted into government. They're therefore no longer independent. They cannot form an independent policy. They can only follow the government dictated policy. We've seen that in the No to Name Person campaign, and we're seeing it again here. And many of the charities are obviously the same charities. They have a seat at government. They have a seat in the rooms in which the policies are made. They are, for all practical purposes, part of the government. And they will not stand against the government, even when the government is involved in covering up child sexual abuse, even when the three people who ran this inquiry resigned, and two of them cited publicly the reason they resigned was government interference from the Scottish Government and from, in particular, the office of John Swinney.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, just to end this section, here is John Wedger. This is the face of the very brave Metropolitan Police officer who spoke out in that incredible 50-minute interview with myself, where he spoke about the cover-up by the British establishment of child abuse, child trafficking, child prostitution, and ultimately children dead in the gutter. His reward has, since that time, has been, indeed before we did the interview, harassment, bullying, threats and intimidation by the Metropolitan Police. The last we reported is that he was put on half pay. We can tell our audience today he's had his pay now stopped. This is putting his mortgage at risk, and this is at a time when one of John's sons is recovering in intensive care. So this is Theresa May, Amber Rudd, the Conservative government, their treatment of a Metropolitan Police officer who blows the whistle on people within the establishment, covering up serious abuse of children. It's very, very obvious what the British state stands for. If you'd like to help John Wedger, we're going to look into some arrangements for that, but I can tell you that he does need some help at the moment. And I can also say that the Chief Constable from Wiltshire Police, Mike Veal, is also coming under pretty strong pressure by the government of the establishment to close down the Heath investigation.
Now, Alex in the chat box is reporting that as things stand, the Tory party have won an additional 222 council seats. They have lost only 2. And he's suggesting this is statistically pretty significant, pretty unusual perhaps. So if, of course, the local election results from yesterday are projected onto the general election in June, we've got a real problem on our hands. So not only are we going to have continued cover-up of child abuse, we're going to be bombing Syria, but we also have this to deal with, because this is Open Rights Group, who have publicised the fact that the Home Office has launched a consultation on the Investigatory Powers Act. Now, this is some specific technical capabilities that they want, and they're presenting this as a draft statutory instrument. So this is secondary legislation. So it'll be presented to Parliament. There'll be nobody in the House of Commons when it's presented to Parliament. It'll be rubber stamped and will go through without any particular issues. But what they've done in the meantime, they're running this consultation, which they have kept secret, except that the whistle's been blown on it. And so they have distributed the draft document to a few industry bodies for comment. They have not made it public. They have not published it on the gov.uk website. And it's a pretty spectacular document. So here is the document here. This is the Investigatory Powers, the Investigatory Powers Technical Capability Regulations 2017. What are they proposing? They're proposing that there need to be encryption backdoors if anybody in the UK, any internet service providers, any telecommunications companies are providing encrypted services in the UK, they're going to require backdoors in that encrypted service. So no end-to-end encryption that can't be got round. They're saying that all communications companies, including telephone companies, telcos, and internet service providers, will have to provide real-time access to the full content of any named individual within 1 working day, and also any what they're describing as secondary data about that person. This includes, as we've said, encrypted content. And the telecommunications companies, the internet service providers, are going to have to make this bulk surveillance possible in the case of 1 person in every 10,000 of its customers. So this is real-time, live collection of data, not just metadata, not just what websites are somebody visiting, but actually the content which is being transferred across the line. And it says, quote, that communications platforms must provide and maintain the capability to disclose, where practicable, the content of communications or secondary data in an intelligible form, and to remove electronic protection applied by or on behalf of the telecommunications operator to the communications or the data. So this is a whole step beyond what has already been announced in the regulatory powers legislation. And the fact that the government has tried to keep this document secret, I think, is very telling, Brian. And of course, we've got to remember that the investigatory powers regulations, law, if you want to call it that, statute, is all Theresa May's doing.
Yeah, and we pointed this out repeatedly, that as Home Secretary, Theresa May was building one of the most vicious and most capable spying networks of any country in, well, it's in the world, in fact, and now we're seeing the rest of it come through. We could just give David a chance to respond. David, I want to move on in the last few minutes and show the penetration, its political subversion of the civil service. I want to show a bit of how this works and what the effect is going to be if Theresa May gets in with this huge majority, which she seems to be engineering.
If I can just add, at the Fresh Start Foundation conference in Perth, there was one charity. There was also one member of the Scottish Government, a civil servant from the Scottish Government, in attendance. And when the person from the charity had finished speaking, the Scottish Government person left. So what was that? Was that just monitoring? Was that investigatory powers? We'll find out. There may be a backlash for that brave charity.
Okay, but the important thing is that people took the action themselves and made that event happen. And of course, that's giving a pretty strong message back to the Scottish Government. Right, let's take the lid off a very old subject, but it's one that we need to revisit, and in quite a hurry. This was a report that UK Column put out several years ago. It was to do with insider dealing of Common Purpose in a leadership committee run by the Cabinet Office. And the meat of it was that that leadership committee was prepared to falsify the minutes in relation to Common Purpose training the top 200 civil servants. There was a bland statement. Running workshops for the top 200 on the Common Purpose model was proposed. So that's how they sold it the first time round, whereas the reality was Helen Ghosh from the government had proposed the training, and that Helen Ghosh and David Bell, the chairman of trustees at Common Purpose, who was present in the meeting, were going to agree that this is insider dealing. What we wanted to highlight is the type of people in that meeting. So we've got everybody from Gus O'Donnell through to Helen Ghosh herself from DEFRA. That is very interesting because DEFRA was the first government unit to accept behavioural training. And down at the bottom you can see David Bell there. Now I've labelled the Common Purpose people that we knew about in the meeting. So clear insider participation by common purpose at the highest level of government. But we just wanted to follow through on this gentleman, Bill Jeffrey from MOD. Let's have a look at him. Here he is. At the time, Cabinet Office Security and Intelligence Coordinator, very, very senior people. He's now moved across to chair of the independent think tank, the Police Foundation. But at the time, he was mixing in a committee with Sir David Bell. Who is Sir David Bell to be having these secret meetings at the heart of government? And why were they using insider dealing to hand out contracts? Well, it's been only the UK column that's followed that through. But let's have a look at this man now, because he's into the Policing Foundation, which is there to improve policing for all our benefit. So we had a little look at their accounts, always a good place to go. And in the text, we were very interested to see that a mere 2.25 million has been received from the Dawes Trust. Well, we took a look at the Dawes Trust. That's pretty easy to deal with because there's only 3 people involved. But one man of those 3 caught our eye, and it's this gentleman, former Director General of British Security Services, MI5, and chairman of the Serious Organised Crime Agency, and this is Mr. Lander. Now, why would this be particularly interesting? Because we also remembered that, in fact, The Guardian pointed out that Sir Stephen Lander had links through to an IT company with contracts with every police force in the UK.
No conflict of interest there.
Absolutely no conflict of interest at all. But of course, behind the scenes of this mucky thing, we've got common purpose. This was a wiring diagram we put out some years ago. At the time, Bob Kerslake, head of the Civil Service, was in this network. Francis Maud there, the man who set up the Behavioural Insights team. I'll just pause there for you, David. This is really absolute proof that the party system is itself theatre. The country is being run by a deep state, which is a mixture of banks and people from the establishment. We don't really understand where their power comes from.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. My namesake, Peter Dale Scott, a Canadian writer and professor of, what was it, philosophy, I think, originally, has written a lot about the deep state in America, and it's just the same here. What we see is theatre. It's not real. It doesn't matter who you vote for. The government always gets in, and the agenda is set by people that are beyond the ken and the vision and the censure of the people.
Right, and let's follow up on this, because you mentioned this fluid identity. Where does this come from? Well, thank you very much to another viewer who said, are you aware of Patchwork? We were not, but we are now. So Patchwork for the democratic age. Let's see what they're doing. They're recruiting innocent young people. They're training and reframing them using the role model of Western party politics. I've put in corrupt because that's the reality of it. They're running masterclasses to train these young people in this political theatre. And then the selected individuals are being fast-tracked for political leadership. And of course, what are they promoting? Social and political change and the wider change agenda. What is that change agenda? Well, this is big society. This is rules-based international order, which Theresa May has been talking about. And this is Cameron's big society coming to fruition. And let's put in common purpose again, because common purpose, people involved with Patchwork and through to the big society. So this is what they say about themselves, that Britain is really only a patchwork of people stitched together in order to make something much better than the original nation state. And if you check their website, you can have a look at all of the political bigwigs involved in the briefing, including, of course, prime ministers. So this is deep politics, which says Britain is no longer to exist as a nation state. This is happening north of the border. And if I can just bring the lady in on, I'll just show you this. Who funds this organisation? Well, it's the usual big names, big law firms, And oh dear, the Church of England Investment Fund. I didn't think the church was supposed to be politically involved, Mike.
KPMG there, of course, under investigation for helping Rolls-Royce with their international fraud and bribery.
Indeed. So this is deep state. This is the criminal cabal inside government. So let's bring in Theresa May, because she's in a video supporting the work of Patchwork. And just watch her face and the sincerity as she talks about how wonderful it is that Britain is going to be broken down into a new form of society. The nation state is going to disappear. It doesn't matter who arrives in Britain. We adapt to their culture, and it becomes a changed nation. And I will repeat, in case there's any misunderstanding, we are saying that people who come to UK are being used for this very cynical agenda. And are we able to just mention that one briefly,
Okay.
Mike? I think this is so important. This is the state of the country at the moment, apart from a previous Tory Minister, Oliver Colville, whose big theme is hedgehogs. But here he is boasting that he's spoken to a number of lifelong Labour supporters in Deer Park Drive who will vote for me. We need to say, wake up, Labour, because it's going to need a lot of votes to stop Theresa May building her dictatorship.
Just very quickly before we go then, AV8, 20th, 21st of May, tickets are available. Not only are day tickets available, but there are now 10 hotel rooms available as well if you want to stay as on the residential, for the residential part of it. And that's because the hotel has quickened their refurbishment program and made some additional rooms available. So that's fantastic. If you want to get some rooms, get onto alternativeview.co.uk and get those tickets.
Okay, we're just about coming up to the hour. David, we're going to say thank you very much for joining us. And we'll say to our viewers and listeners, don't just watch UK Column and listen to UK Column. Pass on the information. We need to wake up those 17 million voters again to realise that the Conservatives at the moment are duping the whole country as they do not carry out Brexit. I don't think there's any simpler way of putting it. So action conquers fear. Don't sit at home. Get out there talking to people and warning them of the dangers we're in or the dangers we face. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back at same time on Monday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.